Well, welcome back to a new episode of the Win More, Live Better podcast, where we're continuing the theme of talking to coaches, executives, thought leaders around concepts around leadership, coaching, high performance, culture, and so on. But really, more than anything, these conversations are an opportunity for us to dive into the human side of leadership and coaching. And today, I'm welcomed by our second Sun Devil affiliated coach. We've got Coach JJ Van Niel. He's the head coach for the volleyball team at Arizona State University. And I've had this one on my radar for a while. I've heard nothing but great things about JJ and what the program that he's built, but also I'm really excited to get into his story too, which I think many of you will find really um, unique in a lot of ways, but also I think it'll be cool to kind of pull on some of the threads of how it shows up in his coaching. But more than anything, JJ, I'm grateful for you taking some time to have the conversation today.
You bet. Thank you for having me, and feel honored to be on the show.
Yeah. I, as I mentioned, I think at the beginning there is some uniqueness in terms of your story, particularly in your journey to becoming a collegiate coach and kind of where that started in a completely kind of different domain in terms of being in the finance world for I believe almost about 12 years. I'd actually kind of want to start there because I could imagine that that shows up in a number of different ways in now how you lead and think about coaching and so forth. So, um, what was the pull for you towards pursuing coaching, maybe more full time, from that space?
Yeah, I think I've been in that world for quite a while, and there were some aspects of it that I really loved. Like the intellectual stuff, I loved. Um, but I think at the time I was just maybe getting a little bit burnt out with some stuff, maybe specific to that company, but just in general. And um, I started coaching on the side, and literally it's just I just felt like it was weird because I had no plans on coaching. I'd coached one time. I'd coached volleyball once in my life when I first graduated high school. I remember I totally forgot about this, but I was going to school and I decided to help our old high school team. And I mean, when I say I was coaching, it's like I was like doing almost nothing. But there was really no particularly draw to coaching. But when I went to my first practice, I just fell in love and I realized I had no idea what I was doing. And I think maybe a little arrogantly, I was like, oh, because when I played, I was a setter and I thought about the game a lot. That was I'm not super physical. That was sort of my skill set in that role. And I thought, oh man, I know the game and I'll just be a good coach. And then I went in and was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Um, and I just kind of went down this rabbit hole of just trying to figure out everything I could about how to teach volleyball, about the sport, like trying to think analytically about it. I did some clinics right away. So once I figured out I didn't know what I was doing, I bought it. I literally back then you didn't have the internet resources. I bought every book I could find, DVDs. I went to the library, found all these old books, and then I started going to any clinic I could find. And there were a couple good clinics that I went to early on, and I thought they did a really nice job of talking about having, as a teacher, you should have some principles, and then those principles should drive kind of how you're teaching the sport or teaching what you're doing, and then you should have some data if you can to back up, why you're doing what you're doing. Um, and my experience with most coaches in my life was always like, oh, like I didn't ask questions. It was just like, this is just what you do. And I'm sure they all had reasons why. But I just kind of went down that rabbit hole of trying to figure out the analytics side of volleyball, because especially back then it was very, very sparse information on that. So one of the clinics I'd gone to had kind of dove in pretty well on some stuff, and it just got me asking questions. And then all of their research or things that they had looked at were at a higher level. So I just kind of started going down the rabbit hole at the club level to figure out, is it the same? Is it different? To sort of have a reason. Okay, these are numbers that we should follow. These should be benchmarks, and this is why we should kind of do what we're doing. And to me, that was just a fascinating kind of puzzle, I guess you would say, of and forget there's quite a bit of behavioral side of teaching and coaching, which I've learned way more over the years about. But like my initial draw was just okay, like how can you figure out some analytics? Because it was clear not many people, at least certainly in the club, were like using anything like that. Um, and how can you use that to sort of drive how you train, what you train, why you train it? And to me, that was like that puzzle piece, and it almost was like my finance years, especially the last job I was at. We were in an activist fund, and we would kind of really dig into companies very deeply to try to understand not just what the public documents say, but how you could use outside resources plus the public documents to figure out more of the story of individual businesses, what's driving it, etc. And all that stuff I think was just very fascinating to me, and I felt like the volleyball was getting me in like a very early stages of that kind of bug. So that's kind of how I got into it. And originally I was going to go on a sabbatical and take 6 months off and then go back to the finance world. And I just every time I'd interview for a new finance job, I was like sick to my stomach. And I remember I just finally kind of went home and I'm like, I'm just gonna do this. And my wife didn't walk out the door, which is insane when I think back to that. But we just had our 27-year anniversary, and feel very lucky that she's kind of been through this through the thick and thin and supported me, and pretty wild to be honest when I think back of like what I actually did. But it's worked out okay.
Those that I've interviewed in previous conversations, I feel like those with spouses have it's been a common theme is how important it is to find the right person to have in your corner and to navigate this kind of journey in the realm of coaching, and how important that is for all of us. One of the things that I've heard you previously share is like, nowadays I think in particular, just given all the different demands and grabs for your attention, your time. I've heard you say that like being a head coach at that level, it can function in some ways similar to like being a CEO. And maybe that's where I could see your background, as you've kind of already touched on a bit in finance. There's probably been some advantages that have you've
Yep.
used, but I'm also interested if there's things that you feel like you've taken from that world that maybe are underestimated or underutilized that actually are very applicable to the role that in the seat that you now hold.
Yeah, I think honestly, like when you're running a program, it's like being a CEO. And so I think a lot of the stuff that I went through back then, and I wasn't running a company, but we were so, especially really at both of the hedge funds I worked at, like we were very involved with the companies, um, and really digging in to all aspects of the company, and thinking about how to run it and be more efficient. And so I just had so much exposure to these like really smart people in all aspects, like whether it be marketing, finance, it didn't really matter. The CEO, CFO, all those guys. And so I really have approached this opportunity that I have, and really think about it almost like a business, and you've got these various constituents. But I honestly think one that people don't realize is maybe the lifeblood is you just who you hire. Um, and I think when you're in the business world, it's like very clear how important that is, because when you lose like an elite performer, you don't know if you're getting an elite one back. And then if they're not good, it's very costly to the business. And because other people are spending resources trying to help them. And maybe they're just not on the right seat on the bus, it's kind of cliche, but it doesn't mean anyone's a bad person or whatever, but like you got to find the right people on the right seat on your bus. And so I do think, over the years I've thought through a lot of that stuff, and I still read, business books and stuff like that just because I like that stuff. But I really I've tried to approach everything, and there's so many aspects to running a program. And, when I came over here, it wasn't, hey, let's just go win volleyball matches. I think on my very first press conference when I'd gotten the job, I talked about, what a juggernaut Nebraska has become, and you go play a match there, and it's an incredible experience. It's sold out. They travel well, and I talked about like, hey, we're in the fifth largest city in the country. If we build the right product and we can get the right game atmosphere, and obviously you got to win. If you're not winning, it's not going to help. But can you create this environment where you have 6,000-7,000 people wanting to come to your match, and build that? And I think I said in my first press conference, like, there's no reason why we can't have that at Arizona State. And so a lot of the things I think about are how do we drive that area. I mean, I spent a lot more time in marketing and the business side than probably a lot of coaches do. I don't know for sure, but when I talk to other coaches, usually that's not where our talks go to. But I think about that a lot because to me, it's at the end of the day, you're trying to create value. And there's, especially in this day and age of NCAA sports, there's obviously, but there's value winning. That's important. But there's also value in the economic side of it, and can you be smart with your budget? Can you allocate your capital really well? And, when I was at the hedge fund in San Diego, it was called Relational Investors, and we were an activist hedge fund, but it was all about capital allocation. You have this business, you have these resources. How are you allocating those resources in the most efficient way to trade at a high multiple, et cetera, et cetera? Um, so I think about that stuff a lot. And I know I'm going a little off of who you hire, but I think um, who you hire to be around you has to complement you and not be the same as you. And I felt like I learned a lot of that especially in some of my older, because you just end up with like all these type A dudes and women, and it's kind of gnarly. And so I always think a lot about I want to be around people that I want to be around, and I was like that even back in my hedge fund days. Like we'd get all these interviews, smart guys, but I always thought, I call it like the New York flight test, like would I want to sit on a flight to New York next to this guy with no headphones, no entertainment? Like I forgot everything and I'm just sitting next to him. Like, is this a dude I'd want to sit next to, or is this a woman I'd want to sit next to? And I think that it goes a long way, like, do they have the capacity to do what they need to do? But then are they good people you want to be around? And can they complement you? So I don't know. I kind of went all over that answer, but those are a lot of the ways that I think about, running the program.
I love the flight thought experiment. We
Yeah.
called it the bar test. Like if you were to
Yeah.
go sit, right, it's same premise, right? You
Yeah.
go sit at the bar, who would you or would you not want to have a drink and have a conversation with this person? But I do actually really appreciate that response because something that I'm, a really big proponent on, or big proponent of is the role that the environment plays in shaping player development, right? And nobody influences that environment more than the coaches, than the staff. And so, like, I'm a big proponent that coach development will drive player development and so forth. So, where I'd actually be kind of interested just for a moment, you mentioned just kind of the finding people that complement you in essence. I know there's a lot of complexity to hiring and a lot of different factors that go into it, but over the years, what have been some of those things that you've looked for in people that could complement you and your strengths or your strength, yeah, your strengths?
Yeah. That's easy because, I've gone through some stuff here hiring, and I remember, I got the offer, and Brad Keller, the head coach at USC at the time, I told him, I said, hey, I'm going to take it. And I'm not kidding. And I love him for it, but I'm also annoyed that he even did this. But there was someone that we had recruited at USC. Her name is Presley Anderson. She's now one of my associate head coaches. So I had recruited her. She'd gone to Baylor. Then she had been a volunteer at TCU. And I get a text from her like the next morning. It was like, hey, I heard you're the new ASU head coach. Like, I really want to come home. I know I'm a little young, I'm a little new, but like, I would love to come work for you. And as when you become a new head coach, and I don't, I've got no track record. Everyone's looking at who you're hiring, and there's a lot of judgment going on. And so my first response was like, no way, I need someone with like way more experience. Um, but I remembered her, and I loved her on the recruiting. Like we were so bummed that she didn't come to USC. Uh, and one of her superpowers is her charisma, and just she's just a wonderful person to be around. And so I remember I'm like, hey, I'm gonna have a call. I'll talk to her, and this will be early, and I probably won't offer her, but I talked to her, and the half-hour conversation is an hour and a half, and I'm laughing, I'm enjoying myself, and she has a really big personality, this beautiful smile. I mean, she just lights up any room she goes into, and she can talk to any. I mean, I always joke with her, I'm like, if there's a table you would have a conversation with, she's one of those people. She just can talk to anyone, and genuinely, it's not fake. And so I go through that process, and um, it's a couple days later. I'm talking to more people, and I'm really trying to at least get a hire quickly. And I just kept going back to like, and then I'd call Presley and I'd be like, hey, can you just hop on the phone? And then it'd be like just 20 minutes. And then the next thing you know, it's another hour call. And I remember at one point I go, this is dumb. Like I can, it's cool that she doesn't know a ton because now I can hopefully develop her and maybe some things that are our systems or how I teach or how I coach. And she'll be super malleable, from that standpoint. She won't have like a bunch of preconceived notions. But most importantly, I tend to be rough around the edges, not always the best with my tone. I'm trying to get better with that. And every time I would talk to her, I'm like, this is like someone I need in my gym because she's the polar opposite of me and my intensity. And she's very competitive, but just has this wonderful charisma about her. And, everyone loves her. Like you introduce her and we love Presley. I mean, everywhere I go, that's like, I know. So do I. And I just thought, man, this is the perfect compliment to me because I have to have someone like this on my staff. And so I pulled the trigger on her really quickly. And yeah, I will forever be grateful that she has been in a foxhole with me literally since day one. Just promoted her to associate head coach recently, and I always joke with her. I'm like, your next job is gonna be a head job. You're never like I'm never letting you leave me, which might everybody don't. I know that probably sounds creepy, but I value her so much. For anyone to go after her, I will fight tooth and nail, and for good reason because she just is really special. And then you go through the process, and I hired someone else that was a really, really big name, and really good person as well. But the fit was really not good at all. Just how and I did a really bad job in the interview process of teasing that out. It was a really good learning experience. And it didn't work out, and she ended up only being here for a couple months. And honestly, I felt terrible. I'm sure she was really upset, and but it was a really fascinating experience for me because the next person I went into again, I was thinking I got to have a big name. I've got no resume. But in the second round, when I started talking to people, I mean, I was putting people through the ringer and trying to figure out, how are they with their personality, what are their skill set. I knew I needed someone really, really, really organized, from a recruiting standpoint and a program standpoint, because I already knew a big chunk of my time was going to be investing in relationships, especially with the players and like spending time with them off the court. So I knew I had to have like that. I'm not going to say administrator because she's a rock star volleyball mind, but just a really sharp person that can handle a lot of extra admin things that I might have to pass off and be a really organized recruiter. And then I ended up with who's also an associate head coach. And I promoted her last year. Her name's Ellen Andrew. And when you look at her past, um, I'm sure people were head scratching of like, why did you just hire her? Because she was a recruiting coordinator at a club in South Dakota, not even like a super well known club. They've had a few really nice players come out of there, but she had worked at like Sam Houston State for years. She had coached some club in Texas. And then she was an assistant at Augustana, but she was with Dan Meskey, who's now the Louisville head coach and has had a lot of success. And Dan, I've known Dan for quite a while, and a couple of my friends, close coaching friends, and had recommended Ellen for all the reasons because they know me well and they're like, she's going to be a perfect complement. Um, and so I reached out to her, and I remember she would even tell you like when I called, she thought it was about recruiting, and I kind of I think initially she was like, no way, and then we just kept talking and went through this pretty long process, but it just became very clear she was going to be the perfect fit. And she's another one that like I will fight tooth and nail to keep because I love her. She's one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. She's very organized, and maybe her biggest super skill is she is the same person every day, and it does not matter what's going on. She had a baby um, last June, and I mean I know she's not sleeping right now. I know we talk, but you're in the gym and like there's no bad day. And I would love to say that's true about me, but my whole team would say that is not true about you. So again, just another really, really complimentary piece to the puzzle where I just like every day I'm so grateful that I have the staff, you know. And then Sean, when I hired Sean, a couple of years ago, it was the exact same thing. I kind of went through this long process and I figured out like what I needed. And he's a grinder, really good in the gym, can help me a lot with some of the practice planning things that, you know, I'm very hands on with practice planning, but I've been able to start delegating because, as you know, when you're a CEO or you're a head coach, you have to find ways to delegate because there just isn't, you know, 48 hours in the day. And, you know, I'm constantly just grateful of kind of the staff I built. And I think it's an absolute huge key to our success because we all are different personalities and we all complement each other. And then we can all play roles that help the program that really don't overlap a ton, you know, and even at other programs, like when you have two people that like overlap a lot, then there's something that's getting missing, you know, and or you got to put someone on something that they're not comfortable, they don't want to do. So I again, I'm probably just saying too much about this, but I'm very grateful, and it is a big deal. And you know, as every coach knows, you spend more of your hours with your assistants than you do with your spouse. You know, like I see my wife at night, in the morning. That's it, and I'm with these guys all day long. And I think you have to have so much trust in this day and age with, you know, who you bring into your circle, and that coaching circle is a very tight and very important circle. So I can't really stress enough how important that's been.
You know, someone shared this with me. This is on an individual level, but I'll bring it to a group in a second, is that overused strengths can eventually become liabilities or
Yep.
weaknesses, right? And I think like on an individual level, that always has made sense. But then for you as a when you're building a staff, not to have everybody on staff have the same strength and to be really intentional as you've been, I think is really actually I actually love hearing it, and I'll share just a quick side with it. You know, I get asked a lot, like, "Hey, how do you define creating an optimal environment for teams and things like that across different spaces?" And I've kind of distilled it into four kind of core pillars or four cornerstones, if you will, but one of which is systems. And I think what I'm hearing you describe is having how important it is to have a good intentional system for the people that you bring in, right? And for how you hire, and even how through, I appreciated you even sharing that there have been some misses or and or just, you know, they're not the right fit or what, for whatever reason. I, I wasn't going to ask this, but I'm curious if you're open what you did differently after that one that maybe didn't go well, like what you personally and or how did your system for hiring get better after that that particular one?
Yeah, I think on the first one, and she's a really good human being and a good coach, and it just wasn't the right fit. I think I was so focused on a name hire, the person that's a no-brainer, without actually discussing enough about how I coach, what my personality was not good for her, um, how I train, how I thought about it, how they did or how they thought about it. And she had been doing it for a year. You know, she's a very successful player, very successful coach. Um, and I was just so busy, like, oh, I just got to get this, you know, highly experienced person and we'll just figure it out. And you know, that was a complete mess up on my part. And so when I went to the next one, I was trying to protect against this bias of I have to have this experience per se. Um, and I really was trying to come back on, look, I feel very confident in like the volleyball side of things. And and while I haven't been a head coach in college, I've been an assistant for a long time, successful head coaching club and high school and all that. But I try to get away from this idea of like a name or an experience versus what were our needs. And so I went back to what do I need? And I had some other really good candidates, like almost no brainers as well. And I remember I just kept going back to Ellen. It was like, she literally checks off every single box I can. And I remember when she came on her visit, like me, Presley, my ops, Carly, who again is a phenomenal fit here. Um, she was so enjoyable to be around, um, and just so well spoken, so intelligent, and just so level headed. Like I've literally never met anyone that is as she's just the same every day. I mean, our players will always talk about that. We do some stuff before practice and, bring up examples of things we value in our program. And players have numerous times just shouted out on like, we know like how hard things are. And every day you're just you. There's never, I'm upset, I'm angry or whatever. I'm super happy, super down. Like she just is there. But I think my system was really making sure, like I remember writing down a list of like, what is this person going to have to do and have to be great at? What am I trying to get offloaded? What are Presley's strengths? Um, and Ellen she just checked like every box, and it became very easy once she kind of went through that a little more methodically. And I just had to try to protect against this idea of, oh, I have to hire, this person that's got 10 years of college experience and has done all this or whatever. And I'm very grateful I did. I mean, every time a head coach job opens, she's getting a phone call. So, but it's great. She doesn't want to be a head coach. So I love it.
That's awesome. You can keep her here for a little
That's
bit
right.
longer at least. No, that's great. That's great. I'll bring it back to you here a little bit because I would imagine, if we go back to, the that transition moment for you, really diving into coaching more full time. I'm interested, like along the way, I think many of us over the course of time, we start to realize that there's things that you once believed that maybe over the course of time evolve, shift, and so forth. Some of that comes through your own internal reflection, your own growth, as well as the dynamics. But I'm interested when you think back to kind of the earlier days for you as a coach, what are some of the things that maybe you've let go of, or some of the beliefs that have changed for you as how you think about coaching or leadership?
I think when it comes to coaching, especially when I first started, um, I wasn't intentional about the relational stuff. Now I think because I ran my club teams like almost like a college team, it sort of ended up getting built in that way. But I'm a very intense person. And I don't think I appreciated how much you have to make sure you're building in the relationship side. Now, the benefit that I had was as an assistant, even though I was that intense, because I ended up being the person that was doing video with the players a lot. I'd see them outside the gym a lot. You just kind of naturally build some of that off court relationship where they kind of realize, hey, like, yeah, he's like super intense in the gym, wants us to get better, and it's never good enough. But he's a normal dude outside the court and cares about us and, talks about family and all that. Um, but I think when I first was thinking about volleyball, when I first thought about being head coach, for me, it was like all about like, what's the system I'm going to do? Who am I going to recruit? How am I going to be great in the gym? And I probably didn't think enough about how intentional you have to be with the building relationships off the court piece. And I'm very fortunate that I figured that out over the years of, you know, if they don't think you care, like you will not get the best out of them, period. There's just no way. And so I knew that when it came to when I got my shot as a head coach, I had to be really, really great in that sort of off court piece. Trying to find ways. How do you connect with them outside the gym? Because if you're playing for me, and again, fairly intense in the gym, it's not a screaming thing. It's just I don't know. I don't know how to explain it, but I probably need to be more positive. That's another thing I'm trying to be better at, and I, I might tell a story that's just crushing me right now, but maybe I'll be vulnerable because I'll tell you another a thing that I'm trying to involve and be better at. But I just think when I got here, I was like, hey, and I told Presley, Ellen, Sean knows this, like I've got to be able to find time for the kids, like so if they're in here, like I'll grab them and play a game, I grab them, go get coffee, go get lunch, go get dinner. And I think that's really important, especially for me, and my personality and how I am in the gym. I think there's other coaches that are just so charismatic and just great in the gym. They probably don't even need to do it, because they're super positive and fire it up. Like I'm just not like that in the gym. And I'll tell you this story, even though this is I might later tell you to cut it, but so our setter last year, one of our setters, Sydney Henry, transferred, and I love her. She's actually a student assistant for us this year, and I'm so grateful that we can find a way to get her grad degree, and she can help us. And just a wonderful, wonderful young woman. Um, but we have a new set. We have two new setters this year, and we're in here training, and Sydney's been like warning him, like, hey, just like trust me, like you're not going to get a lot of positive feedback, but like he's trying and he's doing everything he can to get you better, like. And so I guess Sydney was telling our young freshman who's came early. She's really young. She's 17. She's like, man, Ellie, JJ's being so nice to you. Like, you have no idea. So it's Sydney's birthday the other day. I'm like, Sid, like, what is this? Like, was I that bad? She goes, JJ, it was 5 weeks into spring before you gave me the first, like, good job. And I'm like, there's no way. She goes, no, literally. I went to Volumetrics, which is our video system. I clipped it and I have it saved in my phone. And she sent it to me. And like, she made this great set. And then I came over after we're in row one and she's kind of getting ready. And I go and I tap her on the back. I'm like, good job. And I'm like, come on, that can't be right. So believe me, that has like been crushing me for a week now. Because it's just a reminder, like you got to make sure you're giving them the props. So that's another place I'm really trying to evolve. And again, fortunately, I have good assistants that help with that, and they call me out on stuff. I mean, a few weeks ago, Ellen definitely called me out, and I think you got to have a staff that's willing to do that. I think one of the things I saw, especially in my old life, was a lot of times you have like the senior guys and people like are not willing to speak up, even if they think they're wrong, and that's a dangerous place to be, especially in the investment world, right? But I think if you're ever a leader and you're not in a space where you're going to get some feedback, then you're going to be in trouble. So
I appreciate you sharing the story. Don't worry, if we need to cut it, we can cut it later.
yeah.
But
Hopefully,
it
people are going to hear it, just be crushing me for that.
no, no chance. I appreciate the vulnerability with it, and I don't think you're certainly alone. I think there's a couple of things that stand out. Like I think one of the things that comes up a lot in conversations that I've had with other coaches is like there are certain things as the leader that you can't delegate, and relationships being one of them, right? And I think to hear you describe how that certainly has grown in emphasis, it was always important, and you being more even intentional now as much if as ever to pour into those. I think one thing too that comes up is when you're the leader, um, it's a good reminder too that the time that you spend with somebody like is going to be potentially the highlight of their day, right? Like when you're it's kind of like a CEO where it's like, hey, everybody wants to have time with the CEO, the head coach, the manager, whoever it is. It's like that, even if it's a 5 minute. So it's a good reminder, I think, for even me as I think about it, of like it may be another however many, and you're not saying this, but it may be another few minutes for you, but it's also how that has a really deep impact on those around. What have you used as like what's kind of like your tell or like the signals that you now use where if you feel like a relationship needs more investment or you feel like it is slipping, do you have a process now that you kind of lean on? And maybe it is some of that feedback, but what does that look like for you in terms of cultivating those relationships?
um, one, as you start coaching, you kind of could get some feels on good days and bad days, and I'm not nearly as good at that as my assistant, especially. But Presley has Presley's like an empath, so she's got a superpower of like knowing when someone's having a good day or a bad day. So I think that's one resource that I have that's really nice. Ellen's also very good at that. But honestly, the way that I've tried to make it a little more systematic is we have a weekly performance meeting, which again I started years ago at Utah. We were started this like back in 2016, and I'm proud of what we started because I know a lot of other teams started copying what we're doing. But the weekly meeting kind of has every touch point for our players on it. So everyone, whether it's mental health, trainer, strength coach, academics, like whoever it is, all the coaches, nutritionists, it doesn't matter. If they touch the athlete, we get them on that call. and not everyone can be on there every week, but for the most part, we get a pretty good group, and we just kind of go through all the players, and I think the other thing you learn, especially in college sports, is uh, because there's so many little touch points everywhere. A lot of times, a different touch point might hear about something, oh, they broke up with their boyfriend, or their dog died, or whatever, where they might not tell you, or you might not know that, and then now you've got that, and I think um, that weekly meeting is pretty good because a lot of that stuff will come out there. If so if I've missed something, I might catch something in there. Yeah, but it really, we have a check-in board every day, which I actually got from the former coach here, and I thought it was a brilliant idea. She had a really good head coach she worked for also, and it's just a very simple check-in board, and it's got a color for how you're feeling the day, and they write kind of a focus, and so we use that as well, because if we see them in red, or I think our other one's orange or something like that, like I'm absolutely checking in on that.
Yeah, I love the deliberateness of that. Earlier you were talking about some of the meetings that you all do, kind of building on some of those core values for the program, and I'd be actually interested if you can to kind of maybe give a little bit of context around like what are those kind of core pillars or values that you in essence you want to represent the program and be kind of defined by.
Yeah, driven by purpose, rooted in connection, intentional in action, and committed to excellence are our program values. And I think when I interviewed, I probably had 9 of them, and I think they were more cliche than they needed to be. And but fortunately, again, I we came down to those maybe 2.5 years ago, where I just took my staff. I'm like, hey, we got to simplify these values, and I want to get to a point where when a kid leaves our programs, they know like this is what we're about. And each of those are very rooted in some things I have with my coaching philosophy and just how I believe in building a program. So I think driven by purpose is easy. Like everyone has a core value system, um, and we try to make sure we understand our players' values. And I think when you go through the process of figuring those values out as a human, and then hearing them from others, you end up realizing that even two people that you think are pretty different, there's some connection. There's a value that'll overlap. And again, that's important, right? Because especially if two people are like vastly different, what's the common ground, or how do you understand that person better? And I think there's some stuff that comes out there. So we talk a lot about driven by purpose. The rooted in connection is just, like I talked about the relationship side. We talk about being connected to each other. So that's as a team. We're a very connected team. I think most kids that when they come in here are pretty shocked at the culture. But I also talk about but you're connected to the coaches are connected, and then we're connected to the community. We do a lot of community service. We try to be the best stewards. Like I always tell my team, when you're walking on campus and you see another coach, another player, like you're saying hi, you're not looking down at your phone and ignoring people. Those little things go a long way. And so I just feel like it's just being connected, good steward for your program. Intentional is a big word that we talk about. I try to be very intentional in everything we do. And part of that is a protection against myself, just, not bouncing around. I think when it comes to even practice planning, player development plans, we try to be very, very intentional with how we're developing and how we're teaching, to make sure we're hitting what we think are the important things to be great. And then the committed excellence is just, that's a little cliche, but I'll talk to my players a lot and about just, hey, whatever your task is at hand, you should be trying to be the best that you can be at that. And, one of the things I've found over the years, in my old life and even in this life is, and I don't know, this might sound mean at times, but a lot of people are really good about complaining about stuff, myself included. But we're very lucky in where we live in that you have agency, and it's not always easy. But at the end of the day, I hear so many times people complain about their jobs or this or that. And it's like, well, if you're really, really good at your job, you're not going to be in that job very long. You're going to get promoted away, because most places recognize talent and they know, hey, the more elite someone is, I'm going to move them up. And I don't want them to, cleaning toilet bowls. No, like this person's a rock star. They're going to manage something. Um, so I just tell them, I go, even if it's like the stuff you don't want to do, like, can you be great at it and bring people around you to be great at it? And you won't be in that job very long. You won't be doing that very long. And you'll probably end up getting a better experience out of it. And you'll probably learn something out of it, and it sounds corny and it's way easier to say than do. I mean, listen, I've done plenty of things where I'm like, F that, like, why the hell am I doing this? But at the end of the day, I think the most successful people are the ones that are like, hey, whatever it is you give me, I'm going to crush it, and it'll be better than anyone at that. So we talk about that of, hey, like, academics is important. It's very important to me, especially from the world I came in where it mattered a lot how you did in school to kind of get the jobs that we were offering and to get in that industry. And I always tell them, like, I honestly don't care what your grades are, but I do care about your effort, and if you're committed, the athletes have unbelievable resources, tutors and mentors and all these things. And I always tell them, I go, hey, if you come in, you get a C, but you put in all the work because we know, you're going to the tutor, you're going to your mentor, you're being organized. I'm going to high five you all day long. Like, no problem. You put in the work, you're trying your hardest. I know that. But if you're skipping class and not turning assignments and getting a C, like, there's no excuse. That is not a commitment to excellence. So to me, it's just kind of an attitude of how you're going to approach, whatever you're doing. So those are our values of our program, and we try to review those, and I think the players do a good job. Every year we have a theme for the season, or we have them put together some stuff, goals and things, and I think they do a pretty good job of roping some of that stuff in, and belief as well. So
I think even going back to the beginning when you talked about you and your staff purposefully investing time and energy into knowing the players' values is so, I think, integral, right? Like we know how important belonging is within a culture and within a team environment. And that is a balance of wanting to both be part of the group, but also be a unique contributor in that. And so you recognizing that, I think, is fantastic. I think that's actually a really nice, you're one of the first ones that I think have spoken deliberately. It came up in a separate sidebar conversation with somebody I was talking about recently too, because I think the other thing is like I don't know if you subscribe to this or not, but I do think your values certainly play a foundational role in keeping you grounded and keeping you anchored amidst all the different, circumstances and things that we confront. And the analogy that I've used is no one would ever renovate their home while it's on fire. And like the point being, like a lot of people, they kind of wait till crisis to
yeah.
then all of a sudden, like, hey, what's our foundation? What's our like, now we need to like work on this. Or, and then again, that foundation being your mission, your why, your values, and so forth. So I think the fact that you all do that deliberately before they're pressure tested, I think says a lot. The one God, I could spend the rest of this conversation diving into each of these values, but I want to actually double tap on the intentional one for a moment. I know when you went on, we had Billy Allen on the
Oh,
show
yeah.
a few months ago, and I listened to your interview with him, and I know you spoke a lot about that too. But I'm interested to like keep the mirror on you for just a moment, and less so of how it shows up in your players, but like for you now. What is your process for being intentional as as you grow and as you develop kind of alongside of your players? Like if you were to kind of peel back the curtain of how you're trying to, you've already kind of touched on it a little bit, but what does that look like for you?
um I think there's probably a couple things I've tried over, especially the last, year and a half, to maybe self-reflect a little more. I have a tendency to, I just move on to what's next, and sometimes it's good. Sometimes I would say losses, I don't move on as well as I should, um, but I think I've tried to take some steps back at time to, think about what I've gone through, how things have gone, what we might do differently, like I'm self-reflecting a lot on Sydney on my Sydney thing, because that crushes me because I love the kid, like, and I really love all my players. So that's got me thinking a lot. But I think I try to self-reflect a lot more. Um, I think I've tried to search for maybe a little more feedback, even if I might not like it, from people around me more. And then I think another big one is I've tried to be way more intentional about making sure I keep some me time, because that's never. And I work a lot and I don't turn it off ever. I think when your first job is in an investment bank and you're working 120 hours a week, the idea of not grinding is just weird, like, um, so it's just something I've done. And I think, um, especially being a head coach, trying to make sure I'm reminding my staff that if I'm at work, they don't need to be at work. Like, I don't care. Like, as long as we're doing the things we got to do, we got to do. But also, I felt like my first couple of years here, I was getting pretty out of shape again, and I wasn't investing much in just taking care of myself, and I'm older, and so I probably think a lot more about longevity and not just like how long you're going to live, but how healthy you're going to live, So I'd say I've cleaned up quite a bit on. I really try to keep my mornings, like my mornings before practice. We tend to start between 9 or 10, and like that pocket before then is like my time to go to the gym, just be on my own, and I never schedule anything at that time anymore. And that's not how it used to be. It was like I would fill every single thing with whatever I could and whatever, and I think that was bad. And I think it was bad for even how I was at home, like, so I think that's one of them. The other one is I've tried to be way, way, way more intentional and better with my wife of making sure we have date nights, making sure in the evening I get, even if it's just sitting and watching a TV show for an hour, like just a time where I'm just with her, because I don't always get home in time for dinner. Um, but I think those are some things I've tried to make sure I'm really, really way more intentional and cognizant about. And that is not how I really was. Even when I started, like I was just, you're trying to build a program, and we're still building. Like we are not done at all. Not even close to where we want to be. But fortunately, I've had a very consistent staff here for a long time. We've got a lot of things that are pretty organized, and but I realized I was letting a lot of too much stuff go, that with things that matter in my life. And so I think that's another area I've tried to be way more intentional. And the amount of times I've heard CEOs and literally say, like they say it, right? And my, I was like that typical, like, oh, whatever. I can work, 18 hours a day. It just doesn't matter. Like I'll sleep 5, and sleep does matter. It turns out. Um, and so I think those are some areas that I've tried to be um, significantly more intentional and smart about, because I don't want to burn out. Like it can happen. You never think it's you until it is, and I think you got to protect against that.
It's wild to me how discreet and subtle that kind of drift can happen as coaches, right? The drift away from, I mean, that's kind of what well, I had somebody ask me about a year ago. They were like, okay, tell me in one word now that you want to, I work with, college and pro coaches. They're like, what problem do you help them solve? And I've landed on drift
I
because I
love it.
think that's what so many, and I think that's what good coaches do for players, right? Like you have players that have goals, they have aspirations, they have the type of player they want to become, and inevitably along the way, they just slowly drift off course, and you're like the rumble strips on the side of the road, right? Just little nudges, getting them back on track, reminding them the standards and so forth. But it's come up a lot in my work of like, well, who does that for coaches? And I'll just share this, not that I don't know if it'll resonate or not for you, but it was a lot of what you shared resonates on a personal level because I have shared many times of like I am obsessed. There was a given time where I would be listening to a podcast or a book like in the shower, and I'm like, what am I doing? Like I'm just like there was no space for silence or a space for reflection and so forth. So anyway, on a personal level, I resonated, but the sentiment that was shared with me that I really liked came from a book. And they were like, hey, we've all heard this term where, like, when you get on an airplane And if you have kids, they always say, hey, make sure you put your oxygen mask on first
Yep.
before you help your kids. And the point, though, that she added that I thought was really good was we hear this and yet we still don't do it.
Yep.
And her point being, inevitably, there will come a moment where you should probably put your oxygen mask on first and you don't. So her point was, who in your life will put your oxygen mask on for you?
Yep.
And have you given them permission to do so? And I just like on a personal level, like that is something I've come back to a lot. And so I appreciate you sharing just kind of your own growth and experience with it, because I think it ties in so well to like really what the theme of the show is. The theme of like my work with coaches is like, hey, I want you to win more both personally and professionally, and I don't want it to come at the expense of your health, your well-being, relationships, and yourself. So anyway, I appreciate you as a sidebar sharing that. I want to be mindful of your time, JJ, and if I can, if I can sneak a last second question
Okay.
here. I try to ask every guest this at the very end, but JJ, what is something that you're proud of that maybe you don't always get an excuse to talk about?
Well, my smartest answer is nothing, but that's one thing I'm very bad at self-reflecting. In fact, my staff does a nice job of reframing things for me plenty of times. I think I'd say there's probably two things, and one's definitely a more vulnerable answer, but just being able to kind of make it with my wife, through just a lot of hard times, especially given the way I went about becoming a coach was definitely not well planned, not intentional in any way, shape, or form. And I think that's the type of thing that like marriages don't typically survive. And the fact that we're able to make it work, I'm very proud of that. And I would say like I'm happier and with her than I've ever been, and she's happier with me, and like really, really good space there. But there's a lot of ups and downs, when you go through that and you take a 95% pay cut and literally qualify for food stamps, which is crazy. That puts a lot of strain, like there's all kinds of stressors that go into a marriage, and that's a massive one. So I'm very proud of that. And then, but counter to that, even that I'm proud that like I made this jump, I think it's easy to, I was in an industry where I was probably just a few years away from making like crazy money. And just walking away and going with something that I was so passionate about. Um, that's one of my new terms with my team. When I get a little heated, I'm like, you guys, I'm not angry. I'm just passionate. um, which now my staff throws in my face all over. It's hysterical. Um,
Absolutely. That doesn't surprise me. That's good. I love when those things get spun.
so yeah. But I think I found this passion, and it's that corny statement of, find something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And if I could encourage any young person, it's absolutely true. Like like we have all kinds of bad that happens and stress, and I probably work just as much or more than I ever did in my past life. Um, but man, I love what I do, and I feel so grateful, and I'm proud of the fact that I pulled the trigger and like I went for it, and it wasn't like right away. There were plenty of times where I'm like, maybe I should go back. Maybe this isn't the right thing. Even in college, it took me 10 years to get my head job. And, I felt I was ready, long before that, but, various circumstances, and, it would have been easy. I could have easily gone back and helped run the old club I was at and probably make really good money doing that. But, um, I'm proud that I kind of stuck it through and I've been able to, start building this thing here. And it's really, really fun, especially to me.
That's awesome. No, I think that's a great way to cap it too. So JJ, I just want to thank you for taking some time. I know your schedule, you have plenty on your plate, and a lot of people asking for your time and energy. So the fact that you made some time with this and you were really intentional and I think thoughtful and also vulnerable with your responses, it means a great deal. And I think there's a lot that those that are listening can pull from the conversation. So thank you.
You bet. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And I love what you're putting out there for us coaches. It's really fun to listen. So thank you.